Now, this again does not mean that there's a simple rule for what our help should be. You know what I mean? If, for example, we see someone drowning, and we jump in the lake, but oh yeah, I don't know how to swim. Then that's it's not keeping the fifth commandment at all. It's just being stupid.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 285. Thank you so much for joining me again this week. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome aboard. Thank you for being here. Glad you found us. Hope you'll stick around. Hope you'll come back next week for more. This week we have a variety show, and that means, for those of you who are unfamiliar, that means that we have contributions from the entire cast. That means Mia Anstein, Sergeant Bill Sylvia, and Pastor John Bennett will be with us today. But first, I do want to thank the men and women who make this show possible. The members of the Reformation Gun Club. Big shout-outs this week to Anthony from Cottonwood Heights, Utah, Derek from Huntsville, Alabama, Drew from Excelsior Springs, Missouri, Gordon, Jim from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Kurt from Rialto, California, Marianne from Watertown, New York, and Sue from Conover, North Carolina. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Folks, Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded, and that means we don't have any advertising, we don't have any sponsors. We rely on these good people and their generosity to keep the lights on through their monthly and yearly contributions. If you would like to find out more about the benefits of becoming a member of the Reformation Gun Club, visit armedlutheran.us/gun club. You can join them for as little as $1 a month, and we would love to have you join us. We do monthly online hangouts. We have lots of exclusive content, hundreds of hours of exclusive content on the Gun Club website, and lots of cool swag and opportunities to share with one another and connect with other members of the group. So we hope you will come and check it out. Again, armedlutheran.us/gun club. You can also look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. All right, today we have another variety show. As I mentioned, we'll get to our awesome cast in just a moment, but first I did want to comment on something that happened this past week right here in Texas. Well, whenever there is a mass shooting in America, particularly one where the shooter is white, media coverage is wall to wall. There are immediate calls for gun control even before the facts are known, before the blood's even dry. As though the answer to school shootings or mass violence is more gun control, to control the people who they don't even care about taking human lives, but somehow gun control is going to stop them. We're treated to endless speculation and navel-gazing about how racist America is, how the shooter might be tied to rascally Republicans or white supremacy groups, leftist Marxist groups like Black Lives Matter will then crow about how the shooter was taken alive, and if he'd been black, the story would have been different. We're greeted with, feigned concern for the future of the nation. Our intellectual betters start their pearl clutching and worrying about what it is that drives white people to commit mass murder. But when the shooter is not white, especially if he's black, the story is completely different. In fact, the story completely disappears. It doesn't fit the narrative of white people, the typical gun owner, gun control, all of those things usually go right out the window. And as we've mentioned in numerous episodes previously, most recently episode 274, if the narrative don't fit, you must forget. Move on. Nothing to see here. But there's something different about last week's school shooting at Timberview High School in Arlington, Texas. It's very different. And that difference has everything to do with race, I think. The shooter, whose name I refuse to mention, as is my kind of custom, I don't want to give these people any kind of publicity. Like previous school shootings, let's say compared to Parkland, for example, the shooter was a student, apparently was bullied by his classmates. Now remember the debate that raged after Parkland when it was discovered that an 18-year-old could buy a rifle legally. Well, unlike that incident at Parkland, here at Timberland High School in Arlington, the shooter used a handgun, despite the fact that at 18 you're not legal to possess a firearm or a handgun under federal law. Unlike Parkland, of course, the death toll, there is no death toll. 4 people were wounded. None of them so far have died. And the shooter, in this case, unlike Parkland and those others, the shooter is black. And you would think the story would fade from the headlines because it doesn't fit the narrative. He's black. He used a handgun. He was breaking the law in possessing the handgun. Nobody died. Nothing to see here. No agenda to advance. Time to move along, right? Well, apparently not. You see, here's some headlines that I found this morning when I researched this a little bit. Just wanted to see what the media was saying about it. From NPR, student arrested in school shooting is released. His family says he was bullied. Yahoo News says Texas school shooting highlights complexity of race and bullying in mental health. And then, of course, to follow up on that first headline, this from USA Today, suspect in Texas shooting that injured 4 released on bail. He's charged only with aggravated assault, and he's now released on bail. Compare that to Parkland. Compare that to any of the other mass shootings that we've seen in the past where the shooter was white. There's no sympathetic press, sympathetic to his plight in the aftermath of the shooting. Compare it to Parkland. The Parkland shooter suffered at the hands of bullies, but there was nobody who was sympathetic to that. That was not a valid excuse, they said. There was no talk about race or bullying or mental health in the aftermath of Parkland. It was, we need more gun control, white people are awful, and kids under 21, or adults, let's face it, 18, you're an adult. Adults under 21 should not be allowed to own guns. Throw the book at him, no bail, give him the electric chair. In this case, there's very little talk of gun control. There's no questioning of why a black kid would bring a gun to school. No racist talk about how violent black kids are. No calls for punishment. There are excuses. There is sympathy. And a ridiculous charge of aggravated assault, not even attempted murder. No charge so far, as of this recording, no charge for possession of a handgun by a minor, no charge for bringing a firearm into a federally protected gun-free zone. He was bullied, you see. It's understandable. According to a spokesperson for the family, the decision he made, taking the gun, we're not justifying that, the spokesperson said. That was not right, but he was trying to protect himself. Well, and another spokesman, or another statement, the spokesperson says, due to the fact that they were blessed financially, he was able to get things that other children or teenagers could not have. And so because he wore nice clothes and because he drove nice cars and because he had the things, he was a target. He had nice things like a .45 caliber handgun too, apparently. So yes, they're trying to justify it. They, on the one hand, they're saying, we're not trying to justify it. On the other, they are. The shooting happened after a fight, and apparently the boy had been bullied and robbed twice at school, which apparently makes this okay. See, when white kids get bullied and then take the insane step of bringing a gun to school to shoot their tormentors, they're racist white monsters. No bail, lock them up for life, throw away the key. But when a black kid does it, we need to understand bullying and mental health and release them on $75,000 bond. $75,000. You could, I mean, we've seen recently white-collar criminals with higher bonds than this. So you can go to school and shoot 4 people, including a teacher, in a federal gun-free zone, and all you have to pay is $7,500 to get out on bond. Do you think if he was white, this might be different? I hate to admit that I do. I think this is being treated completely differently because we've seen in the past the way the media and the way schools treat violent and disruptive students, teenagers, when it comes to based on their race. Yes, bullying is awful. Yes, public schools are in general pretty crap at dealing with bullying. Remember under Obama when supposedly they were trying to break what they called the school-to-prison pipeline by being lenient on black criminals at school. That's how you got Trayvon Martin. Schools have been, for decades, pretty bad at dealing with violent and disruptive students, especially if they're minorities, because they make excuses and they try to play the race game. This trying to be, it's not even equity. I'm not sure what you call it, but it certainly isn't equity. None of this stuff excuses what the shooter did. The fact that he's black is completely irrelevant. There's simply no excuse for what he did. This is not aggravated assault. This is not justified self-defense. Being robbed and bullied is not justification for attempted murder. Period. End of story. But I have to, we wonder, why does this keep happening? Why do these things happen? Why do we see the violence that we see in our major cities, for example? And part of the problem I have to wonder is what we are constantly, the message that we are constantly bombarded with from the entertainment world, from music and television and movies and video games, that revenge and vengeance are good things. I mean, I was scrolling through looking for a movie to watch the other night, and I was kind of struck by how similar, how there's not a whole lot of diversity when you go to the action films and scroll through. There's not a lot of diversity in terms of storyline. It's basically story after story about revenge and vengeance, of bad guys getting their comeuppance at the hands of some mild-mannered dude whose dog got killed or whose house was robbed or whatever. Society is telling us over and over and over again that vengeance, taking the law into your own hands, is a good thing. That bad guys getting killed is a good thing. It's why we routinely see people making dumb decisions to try to defend their property with a gun. Or in this case, taking a gun to school to deal with bullies. Look, lots of kids get bullied, but only a few seem to think it's appropriate to take a gun to school and deal with the problem using lethal force. And excusing this away by saying, oh, he was bullied, doesn't solve the problem. The problem will only be solved when we stop coddling violent and disruptive kids. Stop the stupid slogans and the billboards and the campaigns about bullying. Do your job and put an end to it. Stop worrying about equity and equality when dealing with violent black students. You're just enabling them and leaving other students who are there to learn vulnerable. If you treat bullies and disruptive students the same, no matter what their race, suspend them, jail them, whatever, get them out of the classroom so that they're not a danger to other kids, then this wouldn't happen. This young man would not be making a stupid life decision. So that's my 2 cents on this week's craziness. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail, a voice message, or an email. I'd love to hear from you. Get your thoughts on this or any other issue. Let us know what topics you would like us to discuss in the future or questions you might have for our cast to answer. I'm going to step aside and stop waffling here and turn it over to my awesome cast. Mia Einstein is up next, followed by the Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia, and another pontification with Pastor John Bennett. Until I talk to you next week, when it's going to be our Clinging to God and Gun show with Pastor John Bennett, have a great week, enjoy today's show, and I will talk to you next time.
Time now for Mia's Motivations with Mia Einstein.
Hey, hi, hello, it's Mia visiting with you again. I hope you all are doing well. It has been quite a busy week for me and things are going good. This week, Lloyd had sent me a post from Rob Pincus, and it says that it's sensitive content on Facebook, and I guess Facebook just decides what the heck it wants to deem sensitive because they seem to think that child trafficking is not sensitive, but defending yourself against a mountain lion is sensitive to them. So I don't know. Anyway, I digress. I looked at this post and it's a cat, a mountain lion, a cougar. It's stalking someone. He happened to have a Glock with him and he did end up dispatching the mountain lion in self-defense. And Rob's whole purpose of sharing the video was a food for thought about armed defense. And the thing that intrigued me about this, and I told Lloyd maybe I better do an episode to talk about it, is that being outdoors with wildlife is my number one training for self-defense because you never know what is going to happen out there. And no, I haven't had to dispatch a mountain lion in self-defense. I have taken mountain lions, but never in self-defense. And I haven't taken any bears in self-defense. However, I have taken bull elk in self-defense. And I did have a hunting license for that bull, and it is now mounted on the wall in my house. And the thing about it, I really wanted to talk about it because I have talked, it's been quite a while ago that I went on a hunt with Remington Arms way back before they sold off and all that stuff. But I used to be a guest host sometimes on their show when they needed somebody to fill in. And on a hog hunt, I hunted with their 10mm handgun, and hunting hogs on the ground with a handgun is a prime way to test your safety skills in a live situation. It's a great way to test what your adrenaline is going to do in situations that you don't know what's going to happen next. And so these are things, I know not all of you are hunters, and actually in the whole United States, hunters only make up 10 to 15% of our entire population. So I imagine our listener group may be a little higher than that, but I know a lot of you don't hunt, and a lot of people don't want to hunt. But if you are interested in hunting, as I said, if you can hunt hogs on the ground, handgun hunting, that's a way to test your safety skills. I highly suggest that you practice at the range first and that you do some training first, obviously. I do a lot of training. I really enjoy taking different classes because every teacher is different, and every class, even if it's with an instructor I've been with before, they always seem to change it up, and it's never exactly what you thought it was going to be. And while we can sit in our houses and do fire drills in our minds, it's kind of like basketball practice or football practice or cheerleading practice. If you only practice halfway, your result is only going to be halfway. So you have to learn how to practice, make your gun safe, and practice drawing and dry firing and all that kind of stuff before you head out in a live fire situation. But I wanted to talk about this a little because I initially got my concealed carry license for these situations, not for home defense, not to defend myself when I'm at the mall or at a train station or anything like that. I got a concealed carry because up in the mountains, I might be in the oak brush, I might be hiking around. I'm a pretty small creature and I don't run very fast, quite honestly. And if a cat is coming at you, if you run, that's their signal to chase you because that's what cats do. They chase things that run from them, right? So you have to know these things. And it's something that you learn by being outside and getting connected with nature. But also, I told you that I actually shot a bull elk in self-defense. This week, it happens every fall. Every year, the elk go into rut, just like whitetail do and mule deer do and bighorn sheep do. Animals go into their breeding season and they start fighting and brawling for who is the best of the best to get all the women. And that is not a time to address a wild animal. And that's something that I would have been trying to figure out how to teach the general public. How do we teach people that they are actually wild animals? They are not Disney creatures. Yes, they're beautiful. Yes, they're cute. Yes, they look cuddly. I understand all of that. I get it. But they're not. They're wild animals. And recently, I was headed up to Grand Junction, Colorado for a Colorado Sports Persons Roundtable meeting, and I drove over Red Mountain Pass. If you guys have ever been over it, you will know that it is magnificent. And if you haven't been over that pass, maybe you should check it out. There's a lot of wildlife you can see along the way. But something really made me sad this morning that I had driven over. It was probably about 6 a.m. as I'm heading up that pass, and a red-tailed fox comes out, and then a second one, and it comes out to the center line of the highway. It comes out to my car, and I slowed down because I don't like to hit wild animals. I don't need dents in my car or truck or anything like that. And so I slowed down, and they wanted to come up to my window. Do you know what people have been doing? They have been feeding these foxes. They have been feeding these wild animals. Now they are no longer wild. And can you imagine what would have happened if I would not have slowed down that morning? Yeah, they would become roadkill. This is what happens when you treat wild animals like they are domestic, because they're not. You habituate them, they get into scenarios they should not be in, and their lives get taken, and they also can get disease. So these are things. If I can urge one thing besides maybe thinking of going and taking a hunter education class and then taking some courses and learning how to maneuver with your gun in the field and stuff like that. But also remember, those animals are wild. We do not want them domesticated. Just maybe last year or the year before in Durango, some people were feeding bacon to a young bear, probably a 2-year-old, probably just got kicked off of its mother and was on its own. They were feeding this bear bacon. It ended up getting aggressive with humans, and guess what happened to that bear? Yeah, those people sentenced that bear to death. So I hope that you will keep that in mind. If you see a baby fawn, whatever, if it's a whitetail or a mule deer, whatever it is, leave it be. Its mother is somewhere. Those moms, they leave the babies hiding in the grass and they go and get food and then they come back and get their babies. But remember, they're wild animals. If you have questions, call your local DNR or Wildlife or Fish and Game Association and ask them what you should do. If you have questions about it, you can also reach out to me in the Reformation Gun Club or on social media. I'll be happy to give you any answers that I know of or point you in the right direction. I hope you have a great one. Bye, guys.
You can read more from Mia, watch her YouTube videos, or check out her podcast, Mac Outdoors with Mia and Leah, at miaanstein.com. Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill, and this is your Ballistic Minute. Today I want to give you my thoughts and review of the North Texas USPSA Open from 2021. So I worked the match and shot the staff shoot on Friday and worked all day Saturday and Sunday. And the stages were simpler than the previous year, but deceptively more difficult. There was a little bit less round count, but it was still a fun match. And the stages, everything went quickly each day. It seemed like we got done faster and faster each day. Now, having worked a single stage for 2 days with somewhere between 250 to 300 shooters, there was some things I noticed. Most shooters made the same mistakes. The degree of the errors they made were dependent on the level of shooter. But it didn't matter if you were a high-level shooter or a low-level shooter. The stage started where you had your hands on a door, and you had to open the door and then draw and shoot 4 targets through the doorway. And almost every shooter did not give any respect to these 2 targets that were stacked on top of each other on the right. And there wasn't bad points on them, but there was a lot of Alpha Charlies and Charlie Deltas because people just started on that one and they just started blasting away. And it didn't matter if you were a good shooter or, a not that great shooter. Everyone lost points on that same set of targets because they didn't respect the wide open targets. And they were probably the 2 easiest targets on the stage. Now, in USPSA, if you're shooting major versus minor, it's not that big a deal, but a lot of the popular divisions like carry optics are minor scoring, and you really need to get your points. So it just goes to show the best of the shooters that went through there gave respect to every one of their targets and earned their points. After that opening position, there were 3 targets that were kind of partially hidden behind barrels that you could move either on the retreat or run to the back position in the corner and shoot all 3 of them quickly. Most shooters ran back to the spot and then shot, but quite a few tried to shoot on the retreat or on the move, and very few shooters actually pulled it off and got good hits and did it quickly. Most of the shooters that tried it were either moving way too slow because they were trying to be accurate, or they were moving too fast and they just flung shots all over the place. So I guess the lesson learned there is if you're not practiced and you've not really worked on shooting on a retreat or shooting on the move, don't do it. Especially not when the targets are partially hidden behind barrels and may have hard cover on them. You start adding up those levels of difficulty and it just says run to a spot and shoot, whether you're open, carry optics, minor, single stack, production, whatever. Pick what works the best and gets you the most points, and you can do it the most efficiently and quickest. And last but not least, there was a distant target. There was actually 2 targets stacked on top of each other with a non-threat or no-shoot in between them, and there was a ton of hits on that no-shoot. The range officer that I was working with has worked a lot of major USPSA matches and IDPA matches, and he said that was one of the first no-shoots on a stage in years that he's ever had to replace from day 1 to day 2 because there were so many hits on it. So I guess the lesson learned is if you don't have a no-shoot target or hard cover on some of your targets to practice distant, difficult, accuracy, intensive shots, you probably need to. All in all, it was a fun match. I was yelling out scores, and with allergies, you can tell my voice is still not the same, and it's been almost a week. But I'll probably do it again next year. I'm Sergeant Bill. This has been your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Force and a masterclass competitive shooter. You can check out his YouTube videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill. It's time for Pastoral Pontifications with Pastor John Bennett.
Hello and welcome to another segment of Pastoral Pontifications. For today's episode, I wanted to begin with the reading of a poem, The Weaver by B.M. Franklin. My life is but a weaving between my Lord and me. I cannot choose the colors he weaves so steadily. Oft times he weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper, and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly, will God roll back the canvas and explain the reasons why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern he has planned. Well, the reason that I wanted to read this poem and start with it is I wanted to use a real-life illustration of what I'm getting at here. And so oftentimes, being a pastor, one of the questions that I get asked, specifically during times of sorrow and suffering, is, why does God allow this to happen? And first and foremost, I wanted to clarify God is not the cause of pain and suffering. Yes, he does permit pain and suffering to come into our life as a consequence of sin and suffering that is in this world, and there's nothing that we can really do to change that. Again, God is not the cause of the suffering, but yes, he does permit this to happen because these are the natural consequences of sin, the consequences of living in a fallen creation. Now, to use a real-life illustration of what I'm getting at with reading this poem is that oftentimes as we encounter times of tribulation in our life, that we cannot see the bigger picture. We cannot see how our God is to use this to his glory. I'm reminded of what St. Paul writes in Romans chapter 8. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Now, the key phrase there is called according to his purpose. That yes, our God can work amazing things through the trials and tribulations that we experience in this life. Now, I wanted to share with you the story of Dennis. Dennis is a friend of mine from seminary. I haven't seen him in 16 years. I get to see him as of the recording of this show. He is going to be the guest pastor at the mission festival that we are having today. This airs on Sunday. And Dennis, when I met him, he was in a program earning his bachelor's degree so that he could enter into seminary and get his Master of Divinity. And Dennis was, I think he was in his late 40s at the time. That would be my guess, perhaps early 50s. Dennis had recently been divorced when I met him, and it had been a rather nasty divorce. The last thing Dennis ever expected to do again was to get married. Well, Dennis, I got to know him the first 2 years of seminary, left for vicarage, came back for my fourth year, and in my fourth year, Dennis was a second-year student. And Dennis, he had his own home. He lived off campus, and a friend of his, who was a student from Kenya, had gone to live with him. It was cheaper than living on the campus because I don't think Dennis was charging him any rent whatsoever. And Joseph had asked for Dennis's help in trying to arrange for visas for Joseph's wife and children to come to America to, I don't know if the plan was to immigrate or just temporary visas or what have you. So Dennis, he agreed. He was happy to do this. And the contact person in Kenya was a woman by the name of Lorna. And through their interactions, Dennis and Lorna, they fell in love. They ended up getting married. Again, the last thing Dennis ever expected to do. Dennis, after he had completed his studies, if I remember correctly, he had what's called the convertible vicarage, where you do 3 years at seminary, and your vicarage becomes eventually your permanent placement for your first call. So Dennis was sent to Kenya, and he and Lorna got married, and And the year 2011, I believe it was, and this was roughly 4 years after Dennis had graduated from seminary, that they started a school, Point of Grace Academy. And there was only a handful of students. I think there was only 3 students when they started. And eventually it began to grow. They went from 3 students to over 700 students today. Now, of those 700 students, many of them are orphans. Many of them, well, I shouldn't say many, but there's a number of them that were born with HIV. There was a story of a young boy, his name was Oscar, and he was not expected to live. His parents have both died from the disease. He was born with the disease. And Dennis and Lorna's work through Point of Grace Academy, by the grace of God, that Oscar is doing very well to this day. Point of Grace Academy provides for so many people. It provides programs for orphans, for widows. It teaches various trades to young people, such as seamstress work and that sort of thing. In addition to providing education, they also provide housing for, right at this point, it's 200 students, and they've recently expanded to include a building for high school classrooms. And the central theme that runs throughout everything that happens at Point of Grace Academy is the love of Christ. Think of the number of children that have been touched with the gospel, that found themselves without hope in this world and now have the hope of everlasting life. And the amazing thing of all of this is that this never would have happened had it not been for Dennis helping Joseph get those visas for Joseph's wife and children. If it hadn't been for the fact that Dennis had not been married at the moment when all of this happened, that we see how God took something as ugly, as nasty as divorce, and worked through that to touch the lives of countless people and to spread the gospel to the praise and glory of his holy name. So yes, our God can work through the most dire circumstances to reveal his glory, to reveal the saving knowledge of Christ Jesus to those who are still in the darkness of unbelief. Now, I wanted to also apply this to the current circumstances that we find ourselves living in this country. It's really hard at this time to be optimistic. You know, we live with this 24-hour news cycle, and it seems like every 24 hours it's just getting worse and worse. I don't know if you heard the news just a few days ago that there was a report that came out that found that the CDC, our own government CDC, in the last part of 2019 was providing PCR tests to the Chinese government. These are the tests that are used to determine whether or not a person has coronavirus. So this tells us that, first of all, it was an outbreak in China late in 2019, and that there is a very good chance that our own government knew about it even then, because it was our CDC providing them with those tests. We feel like we're being lied to every day when it comes to this virus, when it comes to the vaccines. And then we look at the economy, that inflation is on the rise. The jobless numbers are astronomical. Right now, there are 10 million job openings in this country that aren't being filled. If you've wondered why you're paying more at the grocery store, why you're paying more for things such as toilet paper and paper towels and just the basic necessities, why the cost of electronics and cars are through the roof right now, it's because people aren't working. The supply chain has been broken. And when that happens, there's less of a supply. That which is needed fetches a higher price, and we've got inflation. It doesn't look too good right now. We see also what's happening within education. We have now where concerned parents who aren't very pleased with the disgusting ideologies that the children are being taught in school are now being labeled as domestic terrorists by teachers' unions, by school board unions, And now it looks like that the FBI is taking this same kind of approach towards parents who simply want their children to stop being taught things like critical race theory or having a transgenderism shoved down their children's throats. Yes, things look bleak. I'll give you that. I consider myself to be an optimist, and right now there's not a whole lot happening in our country that makes me optimistic, except for this. For a long time in our country, there was this silent majority. You know, we can think of all the protests, all the violence that we saw from groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and that was just a very small percentage. But that was just the beginnings, I believe, of the stoking of this fire that's been lit in the hearts of conservatives, where now we are more energized and we are more dedicated to fighting for the future of our children and of our nation. We also see how, as the left gets even more radical, that even those who were considered very liberal years ago are now starting to shift. Now, yes, Bill Maher is still a liberal, but if you listen to a lot of what he's saying, he no longer is in step with the rest of the mainstream Democrat Party, at least that which is represented by elected politicians in D.C. There seems to be this growing surge of support to get this country back on track to a path of prosperity and liberty. So as you're discouraged, and I know many of you are, I'm discouraged, I'll be honest. We also need to remember that even in the most dire circumstances, our God is still in control. If God could take something like a divorce, Dennis's divorce, and through the various events in his life, lead that to the building of a school for over 700 children in Kenya, certainly our God could work through something like the horrors that we are seeing on a daily basis take place in this country. Well, that's all for this time. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, if you have any news articles or anything that you would like me to address in my segment and a future segment, certainly you can send that feedback through the normal channels of communication. Christ's blessings to you all, and have a very blessed week.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.